You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. It's Spencer German with you. Nick Wilson, he's missing in action for this episode, but excited to be back with you. And I do want to remind you guys, as always, to like, follow, subscribe, Sons of the Shoe, wherever it is you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app. If you watch via the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel, we appreciate your viewership, your listenership, as always. And this week, I'm very excited because we have a very special guest joining me on the show to talk about all things Ohio State, all things college football. We'll kind of go around the horn with him a little bit here, but former Ohio State Buckeye Tyvis Powell joining me on the show. Tyvis, I know it has been a long time coming. We've been meaning to get you on here. I was kind of holding off because I was like, listen, I know Tyvis. He's always going to come through. So I wanted to wait for the right moment, but I'm glad we got a chance to connect here and get you on the show.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you allowing me to come on. I felt kind of offended that it took this long. I'm like, you know me. How's it going to take this long? But it's better late than never.
No, like I said, I'm appreciative for your time, man, and I do apologize it took so long. We'll try to make this more of a regular thing, especially as we get closer to the season here this summer. But those of you who don't know, you should. But Tyvis, obviously a former Ohio State Buckeye. He now can be heard and seen on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, as well as a number of other places. He does the Browns post-game show over at 92 to The Fan, which is obviously where we do the podcast through. So, Tyvis, I want to talk about a bunch of different things with you, but I know that you have some insight into sort of how the collectives sort of operate in college football. And I know that's a big topic of conversation nowadays with NIL. I try to read up on this stuff, and I don't even have a great idea of everything that goes into it. So I'm looking for you to maybe provide some insight into how it all works with like the collectives and the schools and the relationships and how they're making those contacts and helping these kids earn that NIL money.
Yeah, so basically what happens is the school has interest in a player. And, obviously they have a value of the kid and what they think the kid is worth. A lot of teams go off of position needs. So usually everybody in that position group usually makes around the same amount of money. So when you go out and recruit these kids, that value with that position is usually what they typically offer. Now, stars do play a part. 3-star kid's not going to make the same amount that a 5-star kid would get, or the guy that's like a number one at his position. Like that guy's going to get a lot of money. But the way that it works is the school finds the value. They tell the collective makes a deal with this player that can be valid once he's enrolled in class. So once he gets in school and is enrolled in class, he can then sign that contract they're all 1-year deals. You can renegotiate your contract after the first year. They sign 1-year deals because, typically after a year, some players tend to get in the transfer portal, things happen. So they want to just make sure that everything is done and make sure that the kid can earn his money. And if he wants to leave after a year, he doesn't owe the collective anything. Usually they have a bunch of things that they have to do. It's not a bunch, but it's some things that they do. They have event appearances, social media posts, signing some footballs, recording videos, stuff like that. It's stuff that is not that difficult because at the end of the day, the collective doesn't want to take time away from them. They want these guys to be able to play football, keep football the main thing. Obviously, they want to make a little bit of money off of them and make sure that they're getting some market value out of them, but they're not going to do stuff that is outrageous. So a lot of the time it's been good. We haven't had any push or pull back. Every kid has really did their obligations and everything has been smooth at Ohio State.
So you mentioned that you mentioned how the kids come in and there's kind of a value placed on a certain position. I'm curious, is that something that's set by the school? Is that something that's set by the collective? Or is that something that kind of across the board in college football teams kind of have a market value placed almost like what you would see in the NFL?
Yeah, it's more like the NFL, where typically quarterbacks is obviously gets the biggest value. Then you look at linemen, then you look at wide receivers, stuff like that. So typically, I would say that if you know what the NFL value is of a player of that position group, it just trickles down to college football. Now they're not making that nearly the amount of money that those players in the NFL are, but you get the gist of which players is getting paid the most money.
So off of that, how does something like what we saw this offseason from Ohio State kind of come to fruition where all of a sudden they have this kind of injection of money that they're able to spend on guys? They hit the transfer portal. They get a guy like Caleb Downs. They're bringing in all these different these transfer guys, but they're also going out and hitting another big recruiting class. Is that something that's more so a school sort of pushing for people to donate to the collective or support the collective, or is that more of a collective driven effort to bring that money in?
It's really the school. The school really did a effort of making it known that they want to be better in NIL, and the fan base reacted in a positive way. They were able to make donations. It wasn't just the 1870s Society. The foundation is the other collective, Cardell Jones works for. They did a really good job of helping getting some of the kids in the transfer portal, getting a kid like Caleb Downs here. That was all Cardell and Brian being able to team up and get that done. So it's just been a collective effort, and the thing about this is when you have two different collectives, it's easy to sprinkle money out. Both collectives is coming, are getting donations from all these fans. So they're able to have money in both and not just put a lot of money on one collective. So you got two different ones that you're dealing with that you can spread them funds out or around. And that's how Ohio State was able to get and land some of these top recruits, but also get some key guys out the transfer portal.
Talking with Tyvis Powell on Sons of the Shoe, former Ohio State Buckeye defensive back. And we talk about guys coming in through the transfer portal, especially via some of that money that was brought in for NIL purposes. And one of those names is Will Howard, the quarterback who's obviously out there competing for the starting job. Early observations, Tyvis. I know we just had the spring game last month. Spring practice is obviously wrapped up, and they'll be back later this summer to sort of get things going before the start of the season. But there's a lot of talk about some of the competition that was going on. Julian Sayin maybe throwing his name in there. We know Devin Brown was kind of getting into the mix. But at this point for you, do you kind of sit back and feel like it is Will Howard's job to lose at this point going into the next year?
Yeah, well, I definitely want Will Howard to be that guy. But I will say Devin Brown is doing an excellent push. The one thing about Devin Brown is he thrives on competition. Nothing's over until it's over for him. So he's been doing a really good job of battling Will Howard for that starting position. Both of them look pretty good in the spring. What I will say is both quarterbacks really, really want to be the starter this year, because when you look at those weapons that they got, you could just put the ball in the area and these guys is going up and making plays. So obviously, I don't think neither one of them separated themselves. I think it's pretty neck and neck. I do think Will Howard has a little bit of the leg up because of the simple fact that this guy has played major college football. He's played in big games. He's done things. He's commanded an offense. The only thing we seen out of Devin Brown was couple of games in the fall last year where he was sprinkled in with Kyle McCord, and then obviously the Cotton Bowl, he got hurt. So, it's not a lot of security for him right there. So he has to find a way to come out here and train in training camp and find a way to separate himself. But right now, I think it's pretty much neck and neck between the two. I will say Will Howard does have the leg up, though.
Another big name that's obviously been talked about a lot this spring has been Jeremiah Smith, the top wide receiver coming in from this last year's class to Ohio State. And it was, I'm sure you guys had quite the efforts with the collectives trying to get him to come here, because there's a lot of different rumors leading up to that before about where he was going to go. But he comes here, and obviously Ohio State's been just pumping out great wide receivers. Most recently, Marvin Harrison Jr. He just went pro. It's crazy to think that the way people are talking about Jeremiah Smith on the heels of Marvin Harrison Jr. doing what Marvin Harrison Jr. just did, that they think like this guy has a chance to be even better at Ohio State already. How much, given like all the talk about how great he is, what a physical just freak he is, how much are you anticipating that he actually might get a chance to play as a true freshman this year?
Oh, he's going to play. I'm going to tell you that right now. He's definitely going to play. Listen, the guy is, I mean, if you look at him, if you see him, you're like, hold on, wait, this dude looks like David Boston or something like this dude. He's jacked and he's big. What he reminds me of, he's like a Michael Thomas, but he got speed. You know, Michael Thomas was a bigger wide receiver that can go up and catch the ball over guys, but he wasn't the fastest guy in the world. Well, think about him with speed. That's what you get out of Jeremiah Smith, a guy that's just going up and making spectacular plays. You put the ball in the area, he could find a way to get it done. And some of the things that he did this spring, it was comical at times, because it's like every day you go to practice and you watch this guy practice, and it's like at some moment he's going to do something that's going to make you go, oh my goodness. And it's the fact, like when I first seen it, I'm like, okay, you know, this is a freshman. He's doing this against 2s and 3s. But when he started doing it against some of the starters, that's where I'm like, all right, this dude is for real. Like, so you're definitely going to see that kid play this year, and I think he's going to be spectacular. He's definitely aligned to be the next great wide receiver at Ohio State.
Yeah, as soon as you heard some of those quotes from Denzel Burke about just how tough it's been to guard him, you're like, okay, this is a veteran corner on this team, and he's having some troubles with him. Like, that's telling you something. With that in mind, Tyvis, Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, the recruiting class that just came in, and all the guys that are coming back, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Is this season, and Nick and I have talked about this a couple times on this podcast, like, is this season a championship or bust year for the Buckeyes? And I know that in a lot of the cases, the mindset of the fan base for Ohio State is oftentimes like, well, you should be in that championship conversation. But I think this year especially, it's like not just being in the conversation. It's like, no, you got to go win this damn thing because of just the talent that this team has on the roster.
Well, I'll tell you what, the overall sense that I get from not the fan base, from the athletic director, Gene Smith even said it's an all-in move. To hear the players talk, they say natty or bust. So I think everybody has their mind that there is natty or bust this year. So it's not just something that fans are speculating. This is coming from actual players that's inside of that building. They understand what they have. And to me, when you look at this recipe, it's literally, whether you love them or hate them, which a lot of us hate them, it's the same thing the Wolverines did. They had a lot of 5th-year and 6th-year guys on their roster that decided to come back, and they won a national championship. I see the same thing happening this year with this Ohio State team. You got a bunch of guys that when they were here, they felt like didn't hold up, hold up their end of being a Buckeye. They didn't win a Big Ten championship. They haven't beat the Wolverines. They haven't won a national championship, and they didn't want to leave this program with those things not being done. So got a group of guys that decided to be selfless, decided to come back, and they want to win a championship and accomplish those 3 goals that I just said. So it's not me saying natty or bust. It's them saying natty or bust.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes is kind of the mindset of the program, obviously, anyway. But yeah, the fact that's coming from the building itself certainly speaks to how they feel about this upcoming season. I think the fans are going to obviously reciprocate that. We get a new look Big Ten this year, Tyvis, with Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington joining the conference here. Sort of a two-parter here. Where do you stand on the conference realignment, the expansion? Because the negative side of this, obviously, is that you break up some of these old-time rivalries that have been going on, you know, Oregon versus Oregon State, some of these different things as conferences kind of fold and these bigger conferences, these super conferences are formed. But the positive side, I think, is that you kind of establish some new rivalries, some new matchups. You get you get some of the top teams getting tested more regularly, which I think is good. And the second part of that question is along those lines: could Oregon quickly become here maybe the second best or the second biggest rival, I should say, to Ohio State? We know Michigan will always be number one, but could Oregon quickly kind of fall into that number 2 spot?
Well, I tell you, to answer your first question, I don't have a problem with the conference realignment. I like them because it seems like to me it's weeding out the weak. You know, it's getting these super conferences that people want to see. You know, they want to see tough competition. You know, so many years it's been, it's in the Big Ten, it's just Ohio State. Who do y'all have? It's just Ohio State and nobody else. It's Ohio State versus the SEC. Now you're getting meaningful teams in the Big Ten that's making this conference much stronger and that's able to compete. Now it's not just Ohio State from the Big Ten that can win a national championship. You got the Wolverines that's done well. You got Penn State, you got Oregon, Washington, USC. You got all these people that can contribute to not just the SEC winning it every single year. It can be a Big Ten team. And I think that when you look at college football and the TV deals that they're getting, people want to see matchups. They want to tune into these better matchups. Nobody want to see Ohio State versus Purdue. No offense to Purdue. Like, nobody wants to see that all the time, you know? So I think that you get better matchups now and people will tune into. The second part of your question is, do I see Oregon being the second best rivalry to Ohio State after the Wolverines? I mean, yeah, but the problem is it should be Penn State. Like, Penn State is the right answer, and the fact that they didn't make that a game that they can see every year was a miss. But I get why they did it. They wanted to make sure that things could be even. And, yeah, I think that – so if they're going to play Oregon every year, which I don't think they are, the only team that they're guaranteed to play every year is the Wolverines, and I think that's a huge miss for them. So – yeah, if Oregon continues to recruit and continues to build and develop their program like they are, then yeah, they could definitely be the team that can potentially knock off Ohio State every year.
Tyvis, I went and confirmed this before we jumped on here, and from what I understand, you would have been in the last version of NCAA football. 14. Yeah, I think you were a true freshman. I think that year, right?
Yes, sir. No, what was it? Yeah, I think I was. Yeah,
it would have been the 2013 would have been the year that came
out.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So are you excited that they're bringing the game back? Are you going to play it?
I'm excited that they're bringing the game back. I want to know if they're going to have historic teams on there, because if they are, then I want to know where's my $600 in free copy of the game. No, the game has always been fun. It's always been something that everybody, wanted to do. Dynasty mode, create yourself, go through college, then export him to Madden and have him come in that draft and do those things. So it's nice that will be back, and some guys will get to see themselves on the video game. I'm definitely buying it. I'm definitely going to play with Ohio State, and we're definitely going to win a national championship on the game.
Even if they don't do it in real life, they're going to do it in the video game in Tyvis' house. So that's all that matters. Tyvis, I appreciate you, brother. Can't thank you enough. I promise you, we waited way too long to have you on. It will not be that long next time. We'll get you on leading up to the season or right when the season's getting going. So appreciate you, my man. Take it easy.
See you later. Go Bucks.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break and get a word from our sponsors. We'll recap everything that Tyvis talked about, the return of college football 25, all the NIL stuff, championship or bust season, all that and more coming your way next segment here on Sons of the Shoe. So Nick and I have spent a couple weeks worth of shows now talking about just the whether or not Ohio State, the 2024 season truly is a championship or bust mentality for them. And so to hear Tyvis really talk about that at length, and I mean, basically flat out say, listen, it's not just you saying that. It's not just me saying that. It's not fans saying that. It is being said inside the organization, inside the program, that is a championship or bust season. That is why, as we debate whether or not we want that added pressure for Ohio State, or if it's a good thing for Ohio State, I think pressure can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. And it depends on, that's what sports are all about, is finding out which guys are ready to kind of rise to that occasion, or which guys are ready to embrace that pressure and live up to the expectations of the billing that's sort of been bestowed on them. And Ohio State, obviously, with the talent that they have, are well equipped to do that. But it's why when you hear Tyvis say that, and I thought he had some great stuff to say, we'll talk about a few more things that he hit on. And then in the final segment, guys, I have a pretty big question. It's going to stir the pot a little bit for a fan base that has been maybe at least a little bit of a rival to Ohio State in recent years. at least during their championship chases. And we'll get to that coming up. But in terms of Tyvis Powell in the interview and the championship or bust stuff, the fact that these players believe it, the fact that the coaches believe it. I am never going to tell a fan how they should feel. I might tell you to temper your expectations, or I might tell you that you're overreacting to something, but you're obviously within your right to do that. But I think in this instance, like, I understand where it can be tunnel vision, right? If you only have one thing that you're grading everybody off of, like to go into this season and be like, it's championship or bust or fire Ryan Day, I think that might be a little bit excessive. But if you're at least going into it saying this season is going to be a failure if they don't win the championship, and whether that means Ryan Day should be discussed as future, whether that means you're going to be disappointed if that's kind of the parameters that you're setting on it because they maybe fall short of a championship if that were to happen. I can 100% understand those things because at the end of the day, like, yeah, if they're talking about it, if the coaches are talking about it, if the program itself believes the same thing that the fans believe, how am I supposed to sit here and tell you to feel any differently? How are we as Ohio State fans supposed to sit here and feel any differently? If they are advertising that, if they're speaking it into existence, if you will, then I think it's perfectly valid and perfectly warranted for anybody watching this team, cheering for this team, supporting this team, to also believe that they have to win a national championship in order for this specific season to feel like it truly met the expectations and it truly met the goals and was a success, met the parameters of what success looks like for 2024. And then we can reassess what that means for 2025 and people's futures and all that. But I guess the way I would break it down is I don't like if they get to the championship, and I've been saying this for a while, and they lose. Do I think Ryan Day should be fired for that? Probably not. I mean, he's continuing to get you the results in that way, or he's back to getting you the results in that way. Obviously, the last couple of years, it hasn't been the case. And that's part of the reason why people have built this case against him to potentially move on from him. But if he gets you back to that plateau, beats Michigan, checks the big boxes that you're looking for, then I don't think that it's going to necessarily be a discussion that he should be fired. But in terms of like the overall program success for this season, like, yeah, I can understand why you'd be disappointed in this season falling short. And if they're going to be out there saying that publicly, and they're going to be out there saying that that's their mentality, then I think it's perfectly valid for any of us to feel the same way. So in some ways, the conversation with Tyvis maybe changed my perspective because I've been saying I think it's at least get to the championship or bust. But now, and as we get closer and closer to college football season, which is right around the corner, I continue to talk about that each week. It does feel like I'm starting to lean in even more to this idea that, yeah, if they don't win the championship this year, I'm going to be woefully disappointed. Again, what that means for jobs and what that means for the future, that can be debated. But I guess it depends like how you lose or whatever. But yeah, if they fall short of that goal, knowing that that's the way they're talking about it too, and it's weird for me, like I said a couple weeks ago, to have a team of mine that actually I have expectations for. I kind of temper those expectations and expect nothing so that I'm pleasantly surprised that they go out and have success. With Ohio State, though, I think it's the opposite. With Ohio State, it is I'm going to go on with these lofty expectations because that's the reputation that you've established for yourself. And then if you don't meet those things, then yeah, I think any of us have the right to be just disappointed by that and feel like it was an unsuccessful season. Again, great stuff with Tyvis Powell, former Ohio State Buckeye defensive back. We appreciate it and giving us some time. I particularly enjoyed some of his perspective on the collectives, and he gave some insight into things that I didn't necessarily know or fully understand the scope of when it comes to how these NIL deals work and when it comes to how these deals kind of come to be between the collective and the schools. And so he broke it down nicely where he kind of said, Ohio State does most of the fundraising for the collectives, but then it's the collective who, talks with the kid, sets things up and says, here's some of the money that we have in place for you. Here's some of the maybe contacts we can make for you in terms of getting sponsorship deals. We have all these different things in place, and now let's move forward. I also thought it was interesting that he mentioned that none of this comes to fruition until the player is officially signed to the school, like signed signature, not a verbal commitment, an actual physical signature commitment to the school. That's when they finally kind of go through with the deal. And reflecting back on that, because I know Nick and I talked several weeks ago about the Caden Proctor situation and how he went to Iowa and it seemed like just took the money and ran back to Alabama. This makes me believe that maybe that wasn't the case. Like maybe he didn't actually take the money and pocket it and then leave, because the way he laid it out was like there's certain things and certain commitments that you're going to have to meet in order for there not to be any like lawsuits brought against you, or the collective doesn't necessarily get upset with you about like, hey, you stole money from us, we want it back, and there's nothing, that you have to maybe take to a legal process to figure out how you're going to sort those things out or work those things out. So my guess is because he wasn't there long enough, maybe he met some of the commitments, like Tyvis mentioned, social media posts or public appearances. Maybe he made a couple of those things, and so he made that money. But once he leaves, that money's now off the table and completely gone, and he doesn't see the rest of it. So it's not just like some lump sum that's like, oh, here, almost in the way of like an NFL signing bonus. And I guess that maybe should have been a follow-up I asked, is like, is there some sort of signing bonus process that's done here on top of the money that you then earn for the appearances and things? That's maybe a question we can ask Tyvis at a later time, next time I get a chance to have him on, and it came to me a little bit too late, so I apologize. But I do think it's interesting to hear how that process kind of works and what it all kind of means in terms of how the kids are getting paid and what they're getting paid actually for. Because as we know, it's not supposed to be a pay for play setup where, okay, if you see this much playing time or you're on the field this much, now we're going to pay you. Now, that doesn't mean it won't change. The landscape in college football is fast-paced as hell right now. It is constantly changing. It is constantly moving. But as of now, I know that's not supposed to be how it's set up. So it's based off of a lot of these other things in terms of promoting a brand or whatever it might be in order for that player to earn, make public appearances, sign autographs, in order for that player to earn that money that's part of their official NIL deal. I also thought it was interesting, that's why I followed up on it, that he mentioned, there's kind of a set number for 5-star recruits and 4-star recruits in certain position groups. And obviously the quarterback tips the scales of that. I found that fascinating too, just because that feels very NFL-ish to me, in that, okay, we know offensive linemen are generally making around this much. We know running backs are generally making around this much. Are you a 5-star recruit? Are you a 4-star recruit? And the way Tyvis made it sounds like it's more of like a kind of universal across college football thing, not so much a school thing. I wonder, I'd be interested to hear more about that specifically. Like, is it really sort of a universal belief around college football that guys are kind of set prices? And is that something that that's to come down the line, where there's maybe more publicly known money set for each position? Or is it more like a school-to-school type thing? So I found all that very interesting, and that's part of the reason why I loved having Tyvis on and wanted to have Tyvis on, because he does some work with the collective, and there's just so much, changing with the landscape of it all, and so many things that some of us don't necessarily all understand, that I found it fascinating to learn more about that and be able to talk to somebody who's kind of in those meetings, in those conversations, and understands, has a better viewpoint of how it all kind of flows and how it all comes together. So really good stuff from him. I also thought, I know that Nick is going to try to hold me to whatever. I don't even remember what it was at this point because I've changed it so many damn times. But the more and more we hear the hype about Jeremiah Smith, I'm not putting him in the box of being restricted to a certain amount of yards or a certain amount of touchdowns or a certain amount of receptions anymore. Like everybody keeps saying, and Tyvis reiterated it again, that guy's going to see the field. It is undeniable. And we've all obviously understood that to this point. It's just been kind of a matter of how much is he going to see the field, because we don't necessarily see a lot of Ohio State true freshmen come in and start immediately and make that impact immediately. But from the sounds of it, he's going to be out there. He's going to get a lot of reps. He's going to get a lot of playing time. And so my expectations continue to raise in terms of my stats that I'm going to put on him. I'm not going to sit here today and give you a new one after I gave you another one like 3 weeks ago from my initial prediction. But just know, even though Nick's going to try to hold me to it, I'm gonna up that ante a little bit as we get closer to the season and have even higher expectations for what I think his numbers are going to look like, because he's going to be a bona fide starter on this team, and I can't wait to see what he does in just year one of what should be an illustrious career at Ohio State, because everyone just keeps raving about the freak of nature that he is. Tyvis called him Marvin Harrison Jr. with a little bit more speed. I mean, sign me up for that. Coming up here this fall, but even beyond, depending on how long his Ohio State career lasts before he goes pro. All right, let's take a break. We'll hear from our sponsors here momentarily. When we get back, final segment of this week's episode and this week's show, Dabo Swinney continues to put his foot in his mouth. And it got me wondering, can we call Ryan Day a better coach than Dabo Swinney at this point in their careers? We'll talk about it on the other side, but quick, here's a word from our sponsors. Final segment, Sons of the Shoe, for this week. And I have an interesting question to throw your guys' way that I hope can generate some great debate on the 92 Through the Fan YouTube page in the comments section on X. You can find me there at Spencito_. Since I'm the one asking the question, no Nick this week, you can hit me right up myself and talk about it with me. I'm open to this debate. But Dabo Swinney was on Sirius XM Radio, college sports on Sirius XM Radio with host Roddy Jones, and he was talking about the transfer portal and why Clemson didn't necessarily take advantage of adding guys through that avenue this offseason. I found his answer to be very, very interesting, and it got me wondering about who we can consider the better coach of the two at this point, Dabo Swinney or Ryan Day. We'll talk about that on the other side, but here is that clip real quick. I want to play the video and the audio of Dabo talking about the transfer portal.
There's three types of players in the portal. I mean, it's really pretty simple. Most of the guys in the portal aren't good enough to play for us.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it. I mean, we have guys that are backups at Clemson that go in the portal because they just want to have an opportunity. And most of them are graduates, by the way, but we have guys that are backups, or they want a chance to go play, and I got no problem with that. And so rarely do we have a starter leave Clemson. You've got the majority of the guys. They're guys that are in the portal because they want to have a chance to go start somewhere. Mm-hmm. They're not playing where they are. They're not good enough to come in and play for us. And so we'd rather take a good high school player, as long as we can get them, which we do, and you develop them. That's the first type. The second type of guy that goes in the portal is he's only going in the portal as a formality because the deal's already been done. Mm-hmm. He knows where he's going before he ever goes in the portal. So we're not getting that guy. Mm-hmm. And then the third type of guy is going in the portal just to see what he can get. And we're never going to win that war. So, we've been really fortunate because, first of all, we're established, been there 16 years, mm-hmm. and we don't have a lot of attrition. I mean, we had 127 guys go through spring ball, and 125 are still on the roster, after spring, post-portal closing. So that's a miracle in today's world.
All right, so I'm not going to refute that Dabo seems to like they prioritize the recruiting classes out of high school. A lot of teams do, and that the retention of those guys seems to speak for itself. Like they generally do keep their teams kind of together. They keep those players together because they've committed to Clemson, and he's built something there where they sort of buy into it. They believe it. They want to be there. Great, fine. I'm not necessarily refuting that, but this isn't the first time that we've heard Dabo sort of talk down about the transfer portal and act like it's this sinful thing to even dabble into it and ever consider bringing guys in. He gave all I heard when he was going through the reasons why they don't tap into the transfer portal was excuse number 1, excuse number 2, excuse number 3 as to why they just don't embrace that thing and why they're going to stay away from it because they think it's a bad look to utilize the transfer portal, whatever it might be. And this is where the question that I throw at you guys is kind of birthed. This idea that has Ryan Day surpassed Dabo Swinney as a head coach in college football. And I'm going to say this because I know this is going to be controversial. I'm going to tag Clemson in this. We're going to get a bunch of Clemson fans commenting saying I'm an idiot and saying that Ryan Day can't hold Dabo Swinney's jock and whatever. I will say, though, for what it's worth, the last time that Ohio State and Clemson played each other in the college football playoff, which would have been in January of 2021, the year after the playoff after the COVID season, and Ohio State won 49-28. Ever since then, Clemson hasn't really been the same team. So there's a case to be made that Ryan Day maybe started I don't want to say the demise of Dabo Swinney because he's still there and he still has a good program, but he maybe triggered a little bit of a backslide for Dabo, and you haven't seen the team as prominent since, and he just continues to say stupid stuff. Now, he was saying stupid stuff before that and just getting away with it because they were winning. But now I think people are calling him on his bullshit a lot of the time, like I'm doing here. So here's the way I look at it. Because, again, I know this is going to be controversial. People are going to say I'm an idiot and Dabo has, like, the rings and the wins and all this. Fine. I'm wording the question as, is he a better coach? But I think maybe the better way to look at it, at least from my perspective, is this. Dabo might be, like, in terms of X's and O's and what he's doing in high-pressure situations, I think he's probably got Ryan Day there. Because we've seen Ryan Day falter against Michigan now 3 years in a row. We've seen him not be able to get it done other than beating Clemson that first year. He took over the program in the playoff, not win the championships. He fell short against Georgia, and so on and so forth. Okay. I'll give him the nod in terms of, okay, he's seen some things. He's done some things. He has the on-field success that Ryan Day is still lacking at this point, and he's hoping to change that this year with this loaded roster that he is coming back. But what I will say, the area that I think Ryan Day is worlds above Dabo Swinney, and he deserves credit for this, is that I think at this point he's a better program builder. And I do think he's a better he's more malleable and more adaptable as a coach to the changing tides of college football, where you see guys like Nick Saban saying, listen, this ain't for me anymore. I'm going to hang it up and retire. Dabo, I think, is more in that ilk, where I wouldn't be surprised if a couple years from now he's like, yeah, listen, it's just too much for me. The transfer portal stuff, the NIL stuff, I want to go find something else to do. Or, I mean, he's still pretty young that I don't necessarily know if he's going to like retire in the same way that Nick Saban did. He's only 54, but I do wonder, what he sees for the future, for his future with the way college football is, and the fact that he constantly at every turn is just a wave crashing against the changing tides of the sport. And Ryan Day has clearly embraced that. I saw a video clip from last year of Justin Fields talking about how Ryan Day was getting him the bag to come to Ohio State when he was, kind of caught between Georgia and Ohio State when he was transferring, and how, Ryan Day takes care of his players was kind of like the exact quote from Justin Fields at the time. And that's the type of stuff that I just think makes him, again, maybe X's and O's, Dabo still hasn't beat. But I think from a program building standpoint, I think from being a coach that is willing to adapt to the game and the sport today, I think Ryan Day checks those boxes for sure and is better than Dabo in those areas in particular. Maybe that equates to success in the field. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the X's and O's finally come along because he's added the right people on his staff. I'm talking about Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, a mentor of his, a guy he knows who he's hoping can kind of run the offense, and he can just focus on the overarching CEO stuff that he wants to do or needs to do. Maybe that finally comes. He gets that championship, and then we can maybe revisit this conversation and say, okay, has he full-fledged passed Dabo Swinney now? But the way I look at it, I think that Ryan Day is just an overall better coach because he's doing the things that are going to allow him to last here a lot longer. He's not just conceding to the way things used to be. He's embracing things like the transfer portal. And Dabo, every step of the way, seems to just rally against it at every turn, speak down about it at every turn, and he denies that the thing even exists. He's like he's like an election denier. That's not fair. That's not fair. That's reckless speculation. It's just the easy, low-hanging fruit term to throw out there. But he is a denier in that he's denying that this is an avenue to build your team, and he just doesn't utilize it. And I still am perplexed as to why, other than the fact that he doesn't want to see college football change, and that's kind of been his mentality from the get-go. Now, granted, he also had said when college football was changing that he'd go do something else, and we haven't seen him do that yet. So the money must be good enough that he's still willing to stick it out. But I just found that quote interesting because I think a coach like Dabo is going to get left behind if they're not embracing this new landscape of college football. And clearly Ryan Day, and he's not the only one. Obviously, there's other coaches out there doing the same. But Ryan Day has, I think, surpassed him in at least those areas, building the team and being willing to adapt to college football. Whereas Dabo, listen, credit to him, I guess. He's going to go down swinging his own way if he's going to go out. But I also think he's going to go out at sooner rather than later if he doesn't change, because college football is changing so quickly that he's not going to have, if he doesn't adapt and he isn't willing to embrace some of these new avenues to build a team and compete for championships, then I do think the game is going to pass him by at some point. So what do you think? Has Ryan Day surpassed Dabo Swinney in terms of being a better overall coach because he's willing to embrace the changes that are happening throughout college football? You can leave some comments at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube page. You can hit me up on X at Spencito_ if you want to get involved in that conversation as well. I'm sure there's going to be some very upset Clemson fans in the comment section ready to come at me for even suggesting such a thing, but I'll be ready for it. It'll be a fun conversation, and I expect all the Ohio State fans out there to have my back. Appreciate you guys listening. Again, be sure to like, follow, subscribe, whatever you want to call it, to Sons of the Shoe, wherever you get your podcast, the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Did I mention Apple Podcasts? Because we really like Apple Podcasts, and you should like Apple Podcasts too. You can also follow it again at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel and watch it there, listen to it there. Appreciate you guys' viewership and listenership. As always, we'll be back next week with a new episode of Sons of the Shoe. But until next time, as always, go Bucks.